Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly powerful piece of storytelling. It's a masterfully crafted 18-scene narrative called The Boy Who Never Won. And honestly, over the course of just 6 or 7 minutes, this story takes us on an absolute roller coaster. We're charting a course from crushing, heartbreaking failure all the way to ultimate triumphant victory. We're going to break down exactly how this narrative is built, step by step, and figure out why it resonates so deeply as a classic motivational journey.
But before we even meet our protagonist, I want you to ask yourself a quick question. What actually makes a true champion? Seriously, think about that for a second. We so often fall into the trap of defining a champion by their natural talent, by their innate gifts, or by how easily they just seem to glide past the competition from day one. But this story, it completely challenges that traditional definition right out of the gate. It asks us to look way past physical advantages and instead focus on something much, much deeper. And that sets the stage perfectly for the young boy we're about to meet.
Chapter 1: The Underdog's Dream. So we open in this quiet village where a 10-year-old boy is watching older athletes sprint by, and he has this sparkling, intense determination to become his country's fastest runner. But the story doesn't waste any time delivering its first major emotional whiplash. The village organizes a children's race, and our boy enters with just incredible excitement. The inspiration he's been feeling practically pushes him to the starting line. But when the dust settles, the reality is harsh. He finishes dead last. And what makes this moment hit so hard is the visual contrast. While all the other kids are celebrating their finishes, cheering and hugging each other, our protagonist is left entirely alone in his disappointment. It is a really brutal shift from soaring hope to a total reality check. Chapter 2: The Weight of Defeat. Now, finishing last wasn't just a one-time event for him. It becomes a pattern, and it brings relentless mockery from the other kids. They're teasing him, straight up telling him he is never, ever going to win. But right in the middle of all this teasing, the story drops its first major turning point. The boy's hardworking father approaches him, places a heavy, reassuring hand on his shoulder, and delivers a profoundly simple piece of advice. He says, "Son, winners are never afraid of losing." And wow, this single sentence acts as a massive catalyst. It immediately shifts the boy's internal emotional state from sadness right back to hope. It sparks something deep inside him, prompting him to completely flip his routine and start running the dusty roads before the sun even rises, while everyone else is still fast asleep. But of course, even with his intense new morning routine, success isn't just handed to him instantly. Months go by, he enters another competition, and while he definitely improves, he still suffers another deeply frustrating defeat. He ends up sitting entirely alone by a river, basically on the verge of giving up completely. But then, an elderly, retired runner notices him. This old coach walks right up and drops the pivotal wisdom of the entire narrative. He tells him, "A champion isn't someone who never loses. A champion is someone who never stops." This is a real game changer. It completely rewires the boy's mindset. He suddenly realizes the goal isn't just winning right this second. The real goal is relentless persistence. Chapter 3: Building a Champion. That fundamental shift in perspective launches us right into the mechanics of his transformation. Over an intensely packed 35-second sequence, we see the sheer volume of his hard work, and it is electric. He is sprinting down dirt paths, he's skipping rope, pushing his lungs to the absolute limit. He's running up steep hills and doing brutal strength exercises. And he doesn't stop for the rain, he certainly doesn't stop for the blistering heat, and incredibly, he's even studying his books after practice is completely over. It's this relentless high-energy sequence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is putting in the physical and mental grind required to actually be great. And all that grinding actually leads to tangible progression. The journey is mapped out so clearly for us. Think about it. He started at his absolute lowest, taking dead last in his very first race. But after those grueling months of early mornings and hill sprints, the breakthrough finally happens. He secures his very first win at a local race, earning the actual applause of the crowd. And that victory gives him the exact momentum he needs to qualify for the massive district championship. It's his ticket to face hundreds of the most talented runners in the entire region. Chapter 4: The Ultimate Test. Now, every great narrative has to test its protagonist right before the end, right? And this story throws a seemingly insurmountable obstacle at our underdog just a single week before the national championship. He twists his ankle during training, literally the worst possible timing. He visits the doctors, and their recommendation is universal. He has to rest.
Now, for someone who just learned that a champion never stops running, being told to physically stop is a massive psychological blow. But pay attention to the emotional shift here. Instead of panic, and instead of the crushing frustration he felt earlier by the river, he chooses patience. He diligently follows his physical therapy, taking it super slow, allowing his body to actually heal so he can regain his strength for the big day. And then championship day arrives. We are dropped into a massive stadium packed with thousands of cheering spectators. But because of his injury and that slow recovery, he starts the race terrifyingly far behind the rest of the pack. The visual contrast here is just stunning. We see him trailing way in the back at the beginning, but step by step, he starts to gradually catch up. The final stretch is an absolute heart pounder. It is this intense display of pure will as he slowly closes the gap, and then he finally overtakes the leader in the absolute final moments right before crossing the finish line. Chapter 5: Legacy of Persistence. So the scoreboard flashes his name in first place. The crowd erupts, it's amazing. But the story doesn't just end with a gold medal around his neck. Standing up there on the podium, he delivers a speech with soaring emotion. He looks out at that massive crowd and says, "I wasn't born the fastest, but I never learned how to stop." Wow, it is a beautiful, deeply moving moment. That single line perfectly summarizes the entire moral of the story. And the audience gives him a massive standing ovation because they recognize they aren't just applauding a fast runner anymore. They are applauding an unbreakable human spirit. If we look under the hood and break down exactly why this story works so well, we see the architecture of a perfect underdog journey. Look at how it maps across a full spectrum of strong emotional highs and lows. We start with the first race, which hits us with crushing disappointment. Then, the father's advice injects hope. The intense training shifts the gears into pure dedication. And finally, the national win brings euphoric victory. It's this perfectly paced emotional roller coaster that keeps us completely glued to the story from the very first second to the last.
The narrative concludes so beautifully by showing us our protagonist years later. He's returned to his village, coming totally full circle, to act as a coach for a whole new generation of kids. At one point, a little boy looks up at him and asks a very familiar question: "What if I lose?" And with a knowing smile, he simply replies, "Then run again." As the children run happily across the field and the screen fades out, we see that he has successfully passed on this incredibly simple yet profound mindset. Take just a second to let this final thought sink in. Every champion was once the person who came last but refused to stop running. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to turn it over to you. Think about your own life, your own goals, and your own setbacks. What is the race in your life right now where you need to completely refuse to stop running?